All right, it's been a minute since I recorded some process, but boom, let me talk to you about cleanup. So the first pass is always the thumbnails. You can see these thumbnails are a little crude. I didn't record the process of the drawing, but I did a redraw, which is the next step. Usually what I do is I put that on the color layer. I already made palettes for most of these characters, so all I'm going to do is load the palette for the characters that I need the palettes for. And it's a shortcut process to get, like, you know, if the colors are all worked out, you don't have to keep remaking them. So now the arduous process of cleanup is there are a number of times where, depending on how you like to work, some people like to work with pencil, some people like to work with brush. Again, the only difference between those two tools is that the brush is shaped and the pencil is primarily line. For the most part, when I do these type of things, I don't really ever care or need to change anything with the lines. Like, I'm not adjusting, moving, changing the lines. If I need a different line, I just redraw it. By far, one of my most favorite tools is that cutter tool because you can use it. It's the upper, very high triangle looking arrow thing at the top. Now you can use that, and I always draw through my lines because what I want to do is go back in and use that cutter tool to cut the overlaps so that I get a nicer, cleaner, crisper finish on the line work. And that's one of the primary reasons that I use Harmony a lot to do these type of drawings, is because that cutter tool is a lifesaver, right? So all of this line art is on the line level, and all of the initial drawing was on the color level. You can see previously I selected all the blue stuff that was on that color layer and just delete all that, so that all I'm left with is really clean lines. And every once in a while I do have to use the eraser to erase out like where the lines I didn't really do a good overlap. But for the most part, again, this process, once you establish this process, it kind of becomes, I don't want to say almost mindless work, but it kind of is a little bit mindless, because then all you were doing is effectively saying, I'm always going to have my thumbnail on the color layer until I'm done doing all the cleanup on my line layer. And then once I'm done with the cleanup on my line layer, I'll then go back into that color layer, delete all of that uh, basically revised thumbnail. I'll get rid of all that. And then all I'm left with is now my line layer. So in that way, I do like to use Harmony because it gives me that flexibility and freedom to where, I can keep doing iterations, versions of, without a lot of layers, and the layers are sometimes, again, because of color layers inside of this, uh, underneath that line layer, it gives me the flexibility to experiment a lot with that. So I did put the head on a separate layer because I wanted to specifically draw it separate from the body, because I wasn't 100% sold on the position of where I was going to put it. So I drew it on a separate layer just so that I would have the flexibility and freedom to, if I needed to move it around and adjust it, I wouldn't have to kind of noodle around to find it. And it was primarily because of the way that it was drawn, thumbnailed, that I liked it, but I had reservations about how I was going to position it in its sort of final state. So there are times where sometimes I will do those type of things just to kind of save myself some headache. Um, but my process is at this point extremely repetitive. I don't have to reinvent anything. I don't have to create any sort of really complex like ideas. So again, delete out the blue layer on that color layer, and now all I have to do is use my palette, and I'm using that bucket fill, and I'm just going through and filling things in. And again, that process, I know some people initially hate the sort of palette system that exists in Harmony. I like it because you can, once you establish the palette for characters or anything, right, you can keep reusing that palette all the time. Even if you need to do color shifts, you can take that palette and then you could do complete color shifts without having to go through like each individual color and adjust them, right? So the color system is by far, in my opinion, again, it takes some investment in terms of time, thought, and process, but it is pretty efficient. So you can see now, because I put that on separate layers, I can kind of nudge them around. And then I was like, I need this arm to sit in the front. So I got rid of the little bits of hair there. I duplicated that layer, and then I just erased out basically just deleted the color and the line art so that this arm was sit in the front. So now I just have a bunch of layers for that guy. More than I kind of, I could have drawn it all in one layer. But again, sometimes for the sake of doing tweaks here or there, sometimes I will put them in separate layers. So now, because I forgot some stuff I needed to do with the background, I decided, I need to make some colors up. I believe I also did not have a palette for this character at the time. So I just went through and I just made a palette for the character really quick. So now I can go through and just, again, quickly assign colors. It's a quick click inside the color layer. Again, the benefit is that this color layer is always going to be isolated from that line layer. So if I ever need just the lines by themselves, I pretty much have access to them. If I only need the color layer by themselves, I have access to them. The beauty is, I feel like I'm a salesperson right now for Harmony, but if I need to change a color, you can see I quickly could change that line color by just double clicking the swatch and adjusting the color, right? And man, I could tell you that that's, in a lot of ways, it is a lifesaver. If you have multiple iterations of the same thing, so let's say that at some point I decide maybe I don't like the skin tone of either of these characters, that all I would need to do is just select that palette, and because I'm reusing it, I just need to change the color in one of these palettes, and then it's going to update that in every single file that uses that palette. Tell me that's not cool. You can't tell me that's not cool. So a lot of times I'll do like this little white outline, uh, just because I like the way that it creates a separation from the characters in the background. It has nothing to do with anything other than it just adds this like super clear delineation to separate between the background and the characters, and I just like it. So one of my favorite things is there is a node that is either tone or highlight. The color that you use does not matter, because the color is actually inside of the node, which I'll show you in a second. So what I'll do is I'll use like this green, because this green is readily recognizable, and I'm just going to invent where my light source is from. A lot of this is from practice. If you don't practice like where light sources come from, it makes it harder for you to make a decision on where you'd want light and shadow to be. There are times where I will BS some of the light and shadow, because nobody knows. Nobody's sitting around making critical decisions about whether or not it's absolutely accurate. So sometimes I'll do it just because I want to frame certain areas and make your eye look in certain places. So now you can see that green doesn't show up, and now you can see that there's just a shadow value. So let me show you a little bit slower. So again, this light source does not make sense, just so you know, right? Unless there was just a light that's pulled right in the middle in between these characters, the shadows wouldn't fall like this for both of those characters. But again, my goal is to make your eye look in the direction that I want, and I want you to be able to see the features of the character. So I don't want to put either of their facial features into shadows. But I do need form. So I'm again faking the direction of these shadows so that I would effectively give the viewer, hey, this is the front of the character. So now let's talk about these nodes. So in this node view, most people, this is where you get a little bit flustered, because you're like, well, how do I do the stupid shadowy thing? All right, so in my node editor, you can see that there is a tone shader, like there's a tone node. So what I do is I drag that, I hold down the Alt key if you're on a PC. I don't know if there's what the keyboard shortcut is on the Mac. And you can see I drag them underneath, and then I could take the same shadow node, because the shade for that layer, I can connect that into the tone, and I can use that for every one of the layers that I need it for. So I don't have to keep like shading each one. I could just connect that into each one of them, and now you can see that it creates that little shadow, and I don't have to draw like up into the edges. I can go way past the edges, and it's going to cut the edges of where it stops at. That is awesome. And then I just drop these highlights in there as a little bit of a finishing touch, because like highlights make everything feel a little bit more resolved. It makes it feel like the icing on the cake. But then I thought to myself, man, I just want a little bit more color variation, so I decided I'm going to make a little gradient in the background. So I made a new color in the palette, and then I assigned a gradient to it and made one part of it transparent. And then I just duplicated that layer that already existed. I put the transparency from the palette on it. I used the gradient tool in the upper left corner, and then I just positioned the gradient where I want it. Again, since everything is broken into layers, I don't need that gradient to overlap the characters. I want it to be slightly behind. I picked the violet to blue because color wise they're analogous to each other, but it also works well with the blue of the character with the blue shirt on, but it also creates a little bit more of a visual impact with the character with the yellow on. And then what I do is I go into the right nodes and then I change it so that I would be able to get it to render out just this frame. And then once that happens, it renders it out, and then everything is done. If at any point this is all right visually fast, you can pause this, you can go back and you can look at it and say, what the hell just happened? But that's pretty much the end result, right? So I do like Harmony as a tool, not just for animating, but also for like drawing and illustrating, because of just the amount of control you get over your lines and your line work. It's actually really good for that, especially like cartoon stylized stuff. So, if you're ever curious about like some drawing, some process stuff, you can always hit me up in the comments. And thanks for checking this out. I appreciate y'all, and hopefully more videos will be coming soon. Booyah!